Before we dive in, I'd like to remind you to hit the subscribe button. Currently, only 0.7% of my viewers are subscribed. Once we hit 1,000 subscribers, I'll release an exclusive special video just for you. James had always been the kind of guy who loved spending his weekends grilling in his backyard. His house was in a quiet suburban neighborhood, nestled between well-kept lawns and cookie-cutter houses that seemed straight out of a magazine. The air was fresh, the skies were usually clear, and weekends were an invitation to fire up the grill, sip on a cold drink, and enjoy a few hours of laughter with friends and family. He'd spent the whole week planning his barbecue, deciding on the best cuts of meat, experimenting with marinades, and making sure everything was just right. It was going to be the first barbecue of the summer, and James was eager to see his friends again, catch up on old times, and make it a memorable afternoon. The smell of sizzling burgers, steaks, and hot dogs already had his mouth watering as he set up the grill. Everything was going according to plan until Clara, the new neighbor, moved in next door. She had just moved from the city, and James noticed her right away when she first showed up, clad in a flowery dress, carrying boxes with that kind of smug self-assurance you only get from someone who's sure they're changing the world with every move. He'd waved and introduced himself, but Clara didn't seem too interested. She smiled politely but didn't make much effort to engage. Over the next few weeks, he started noticing her more. Clara wasn't just any new neighbor. She was what some might call a vegan activist, always quick to talk about the evils of animal consumption. It wasn't just that she preferred tofu over chicken or almond milk over regular. No, Clara took her beliefs seriously, too seriously. Every time James fired up his grill, he'd see her in her backyard, glaring at the smoke rising from his grill, her arms crossed, and a look of absolute disdain on her face. Every now and then, she'd pass by and mutter something under her breath, something about destroying the environment or slaughtering innocent animals. At first, James tried to ignore her. Everyone had their quirks, right? But it became clear that Clara wasn't just going to sit in her house and seethe. One day, as James was finishing up a barbecue, she knocked on his door. When he opened it, she was holding a pamphlet and practically shoved it in his face, urging him to stop contributing to the destruction of the planet and embrace a cruelty-free lifestyle. He tried to be polite, but she kept going on about how unsustainable meat consumption was and how it was a moral obligation to stop eating animals. After a few minutes of listening to her, he awkwardly nodded and shut the door, hoping it was the last time he'd have to deal with it. But it wasn't. A week later, Clara sent him a note, neatly typed and folded. It was a long message urging him to reconsider his choices and attached a list of vegan recipes. A compassionate lifestyle begins at home, it read. At this point, James wasn't sure if Clara was just passionate or if she was downright obsessed with his barbecue habits. He'd always tried to be respectful and had even thought about offering her a vegetarian burger at one point, but this was starting to feel like an unwelcome crusade. It wasn't long before Clara took things to the next level. She organized a Green Day event in the neighborhood, a kind of eco-friendly potluck where everyone was invited to try vegan food and listen to a lecture on the environmental benefits of a plant-based diet. Naturally, she made sure to send a personal invite to James, along with a note that suggested he might want to rethink his lifestyle choices. James couldn't deny the growing tension. The whole neighborhood knew Clara was the vegan, and there was a kind of unspoken understanding that she'd probably try to convince you to abandon your meat-eating ways if you ever crossed her path. His barbecue plan suddenly felt less like a fun social gathering and more like a battle between good and evil, at least in Clara's mind. Still, James wasn't one to back down. When the day of his barbecue came around, he went all out. He'd invited his friends, a few neighbors, and even some of his family members who'd been dying to meet the new neighbors. He didn't expect Clara to show up. After all, the invitation had been more of a come join if you want kind of thing. He was just hoping for a peaceful afternoon, but as he fired up the grill, he saw Clara walk across the yard and stand at the fence, watching him. For a moment, he thought Maybe she would just stay silent this time, maybe give him a break for once. But no, she didn't even try to hide her disdain. As soon as she spotted him, she marched over, her expression one of sheer disapproval. "I can't believe you're still doing this," she said, crossing her arms tightly across her chest. "Do you really not care about the environment?" James, trying to keep his cool, offered a smile. "I'm just grilling some food, Clara. It's nothing personal." "Oh, it's personal," she shot back. "You're contributing to the destruction of the planet. It's not just about food. It's about your values. If you really cared about the earth, you wouldn't be grilling meat." Her voice was filled with a mix of anger and righteousness. The group of friends, who'd been enjoying the barbecue, exchanged uncomfortable glances. James didn't want to make a scene, but Clara wasn't going to let this go easily. She made sure everyone heard her, loudly proclaiming that meat consumption is a moral failure, and that anyone who participated in it was complicit in environmental degradation. James was just about to offer her one of his perfectly grilled veggie burgers, hoping to smooth things over, when she walked over to the grill, picked up the tongs, and began throwing his carefully prepared burgers into the trash. "This is wrong," she muttered as she went along, clearly more focused on making a point than on having any kind of civil conversation. His guests were speechless. Some were awkwardly shifting their weight, unsure whether to step in or just pretend it wasn't happening. The air suddenly felt heavy, and James realized things had gone far beyond a casual disagreement. This was no longer just about food. Clara, however, wasn't finished. She glared at James and, in a voice that seemed to carry through the yard, said, "You're going to regret this." Her words hung in the air like a threat, and as she stormed off, leaving the barbecue in chaos, James had no idea just how prophetic that statement would turn out to be. The atmosphere at the barbecue had shifted drastically. What started as a friendly gathering now felt like a ticking time bomb. James tried to keep his composure, but Clara's interruption had left a bad taste in the air. He thought about calling it a day, cutting the grill short, sending everyone home to avoid further drama. But as much as he wanted peace, he wasn't going to let Clara dictate the terms of his own party. Guests awkwardly tried to salvage the mood, offering half-hearted comments about how good the food was, despite it now being ruined by Clara's bizarre tirade. James, however, couldn't shake the feeling that something more was coming. It was like the calm before the storm. Just as he flipped another burger, he spotted Clara again. She was standing by the fence, glaring at him with that same look of utter disdain, her arms crossed tightly across her chest. But this time, there was something different about her demeanor. The tension was palpable, and James couldn't ignore the unsettling feeling creeping up his spine. Without warning, Clara marched across the lawn, her steps quick and purposeful. The chatter around the barbecue died down, and the other guests watched in silence as she made her way toward James, her face a mask of fury. "I told you," she said, her voice almost a hiss as she approached. "You're going to regret this. You don't get to do this in front of everyone and pretend like it's okay. You think it's just about food? It's bigger than that. You're killing the planet." Her words were sharp, like daggers, and James felt a knot form in his stomach. This wasn't just a passionate plea, it was personal. Clara wasn't just mad about the barbecue. She was mad at him for existing in a way she disagreed with. "Clara, I get it. You're passionate about your beliefs," James said, trying to defuse the situation. "But this is my backyard. You don't have to be here if you don't like it. I'm not trying to force anything on you." Clara didn't listen. She was too far gone, her face flushed with anger as she leaned in closer. "You don't get it, James. You're part of the problem. People like you are what's wrong with the world." Her words hit harder than they should have. James wasn't used to being attacked like this, especially not by a neighbor he hardly knew. He tried to stay calm, but his frustration began to mount. "I'm not doing anything wrong by grilling some food for my friends," he said, keeping his tone steady, though inside, he was starting to lose patience. "This is a social gathering, Clara. There's no harm in enjoying some food and having a good time, But Clara wasn't interested in reasoning. She took a step forward, her eyes narrowing. You're not getting it, are you? You're poisoning the earth with every burger you cook. You're complicit in the destruction of everything that's good and pure. I thought you were better than this. James felt his jaw clench. He was getting tired of this. Tired of being lectured, tired of Clara acting like she had the moral high ground. He was trying to have a good time with his friends, and here she was ruining everything. Clara, you need to calm down, he said, trying to keep his voice level. This isn't the place for this kind of argument. You're making everyone uncomfortable. For a moment, it seemed like she might back off. She stood there, staring at him with that same piercing gaze, her lips pressed tightly together. But then, without warning, she made a quick movement and grabbed the tongs from James' hand. What are you doing? James asked, his voice tinged with alarm. Without answering, Clara began grabbing the pieces of meat off the grill, perfectly cooked steaks, burgers, and sausages, and tossing them into the trash with a dramatic flourish. This is wrong. You're a part of the problem, James. I'm saving you from your ignorance. The guests were in shock, frozen in place, unsure of what to do. Some of them had already been uncomfortable with Clara's rants earlier, but now it was clear that things had escalated beyond a mere disagreement. Clara wasn't just protesting. She was taking action, and she wasn't stopping. Clara, stop it, James said, his voice firm now, the tension building in his chest. He wasn't sure if he was more angry or confused, but one thing was clear. This wasn't going to end well if it kept going like this. But Clara didn't stop. She was in a frenzy, throwing the food into the trash as if she were on a mission to rid the world of James' evil ways. You think you can just keep doing this and no one will care? You think it's okay to feed the world poison? I'm making sure you can't ignore the truth anymore. James took a deep breath, trying to control his anger. This was getting out of hand, and he wasn't going to let it ruin everything. Clara, he said, stepping forward, trying to stay as calm as possible. You need to leave. Now, this is my barbecue. If you don't like it, then you can go. Clara stood there for a moment, her breathing shallow, her chest heaving with each breath. And then, with a sneer, she spat out, You'll regret this, James. You'll see. People like you always do. James was about to turn away when, in one quick, unexpected motion, Clara reached into her bag and pulled out a small handgun. The whole scene froze, and a cold chill swept over the crowd. What the hell? Someone whispered, but no one dared to move. Clara raised the gun, and James' heart stopped. For a second, everything seemed to go silent. His brain couldn't process what was happening. I'm fighting for the planet, Clara said in a low, dangerous tone. You'll understand when it's too late. Before anyone could react, Clara fired the gun into the air. The loud bang rang out, sending everyone into a panic. People screamed and dove for cover. James stumbled backward, his heart racing, unsure of what to do. The barbecue had gone from a casual gathering to a life-threatening situation in a matter of moments. Just as quickly as the chaos began, a figure appeared out of nowhere. Asterisk, asterisk, John, asterisk, asterisk. The retired police officer from down the street, who had been quietly watching the drama unfold. Seeing the gun in Clara's hand, John didn't hesitate. He rushed forward and tackled her to the ground, knocking the weapon out of her grip. The gun went off again, but this time, it was a stray bullet that grazed James' arm. The pain was immediate, but his shock was greater. Blood started to trickle down his sleeve, but his mind couldn't focus on the wound. It was still reeling from the absurdity of the situation. John managed to subdue Clara, pinning her to the ground while the rest of the guests scrambled to help. The police were called immediately, and Clara was arrested, still shouting about her mission and how she had to do it to save the planet. James, dazed and still processing the events, was rushed to the hospital to treat the wound. As he sat in the ER, his mind raced, thinking about how something as simple as a barbecue could escalate into something so horrific. He couldn't understand how a neighborhood disagreement had spiraled out of control so quickly. But one thing was clear. The day of his backyard barbecue would never be the same. The days following the shooting were a blur of hospital visits, news interviews, and endless phone calls. James had never expected something as simple as a neighborhood barbecue to turn into an incident that would make headlines. His arm healed faster than his mind did. Physically, he was fine, just a small graze from the stray bullet. But emotionally, he felt like he'd been shattered into pieces. The pain of the wound faded quickly, but the aftermath of what happened left a mark that was harder to shake. He couldn't stop replaying Clara's actions in his head. The look in her eyes as she threatened him, the snap of the gunshot, the chaos that erupted all around him. He wasn't just physically shaken by the bullet. The fact that someone he barely knew, a neighbor, could suddenly go off the deep end like that, it left him questioning so much more than just his barbecue habits. He spent the first week after the incident holed up in his house, not really knowing what to do. His friends and neighbors reached out to him, offering support, checking in, making sure he was okay. John, the former police officer, was the first to visit him after he was discharged from the hospital. He brought over some food, nothing fancy, just sandwiches, and sat with James for a long while, talking about everything and nothing. It was the first time James had someone around who didn't want to ask questions or offer unsolicited advice. It was just quiet comfort. John had his own way of processing things. The two of them sat on the porch for hours, discussing the nature of the incident, how it could have been avoided, and what they could all do to move forward. Sometimes, John said, his voice steady but thoughtful, you don't see it coming. 1 second, everything is normal, and the next, you're in the middle of something you never imagined would happen. But you deal with it. You learn from it. James nodded, but he felt conflicted. It wasn't just about the barbecue. It wasn't even just about Clara's extreme beliefs. It was about how fragile everything was. The way a single person's actions could completely shift the course of other people's lives. The thought of it made him anxious, but also made him more determined to regain some sense of normalcy. In the weeks that followed, James found himself becoming more reflective. His blog, which he had kept mainly to share cooking tips and personal anecdotes, became a place for him to pour out his thoughts. His first post after the incident was titled, "The Day the Barbecue Almost Killed Me," and it wasn't just about the shooting. It was about everything that had led up to it. He talked about how easily a peaceful afternoon could be turned upside down by someone else's anger. He wrote about the dangers of extremism, how it could take something as simple as a barbecue and turn it into a battle of ideologies. The post went viral. Everyone has their own line, he wrote. But when your line becomes a weapon, that's when things go too far. We've got to stop living in echo chambers and start finding common ground again. The feedback he received was overwhelming. Some people were supportive, thanking him for being brave enough to speak out, while others criticized him for not understanding the bigger picture. There were even a few comments from people who thought he should have taken Clara's side and embraced a plant-based lifestyle. The controversy continued, but it didn't matter to James. He'd already made his peace. As the summer wore on, the neighborhood slowly returned to normal. Clara was in jail, awaiting trial for assault with a deadly weapon, and no one knew what would happen next. Her online following grew as people started to view her as a martyr for the cause, but in the neighborhood, the once loud vegan activist was no longer part of the conversation. The residents were too busy moving forward, trying to rebuild the sense of community that had been disrupted. James, in particular, was focused on recovery, both physical and emotional. He threw himself into work, hosting smaller get-togethers with friends and family, trying to regain some semblance of the carefree life he'd enjoyed before the incident. The smell of the grill, once something that brought him joy, now felt like a reminder of everything that had gone wrong. It took time, but eventually, he found himself back in his backyard, standing by the grill once again. The first time he fired it up, the smell of cooking meat filled the air, but this time it was different. There was no tension. There was no drama. Just the crackle of the grill and the sound of friends laughing in the background. John was there, of course, along with a few other neighbors who had reached out to offer support. They'd all come together after the incident, realizing that if anything good was going to come out of this, it was the opportunity to rebuild their community, not just physically, but emotionally. The barbecue was no longer just about food. It had become a symbol of resilience, of reclaiming something that had been almost lost. Emily, the neighbor who had once been a staunch supporter of Clara's veganism, showed up too. She'd reached out to James privately a few weeks earlier, apologizing for not intervening sooner, and admitting that Clara's behavior had been extreme. Emily wasn't sure if she would ever go back to eating meat regularly, but she decided to take a more balanced approach, embracing a lifestyle that didn't demonize others for their choices. "You're not what you eat," she said as she sat down with a plate of grilled vegetables and a burger. "It's who you are and how you treat others that counts." That conversation stuck with James. It wasn't just about food. It was about finding balance and accepting that everyone had their own path to walk. He thought about Clara and how her radical beliefs had caused so much damage, and he realized that sometimes the loudest voices are the ones least willing to listen. Clara's open letter from jail came a month later. It was an apology of sorts, but it was also a self-justification. She wrote about how she had lost control, about how her passion for saving the planet had clouded her judgment. In it, she admitted that violence was never the answer, but she claimed she had been fighting for something bigger than herself. James read the letter in silence, unsure how to feel. Part of him felt sympathy for her, but another part of him felt anger at how her actions had hurt so many people. He decided he would visit her in prison, not to seek revenge, but to find closure for himself, if nothing else. When he met Clara in prison, the conversation was awkward. She was different, broken, apologetic, but still convinced that she was right. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, her eyes red from crying. I let my anger take over. I never should have done that." James listened to her, but he knew that words couldn't undo what had happened. Still, he didn't hold on to the anger anymore. "It's done," he said, his voice calm but firm. "We can't change the past, but we can choose how we move forward." After that visit, Clara's trial proceeded, but it wasn't the sensationalized media spectacle that people had expected. Instead, it was a quieter, more solemn event. In the end, Clara was sentenced to probation, community service, and anger management classes. James never saw her again, but he didn't need to.